Sports information directors were making up all kinds of things in the 1980s. Nobody seemed to care when Bama's dude did it, but Auburn caught hell, and that was kind of the point. In 1987, David Housel threw up some phantom bogeys on the radars of rival SEC schools a la War Games Whopper to make a point about the insanity of football recruiting. He actually did compare the whole thing to the Cold War. He's kind of got a knack for military analogies. Remember the whole, remember Dunkirk thing? That was good. His column in the Auburn Football Illustrated for the Vandy game was a glowing profile on a couple of mysterious blue chippers other SEC schools had somehow never heard of, but that Auburn was somehow in the lead for: Joe Mack and Otto McNabb. Yep, mention them by name. Yep, that's a big NCAA no-no, or at least it would have been had Joe Mack, a great physical specimen, and Otto McNabb, all the intangibles to make a great football player, been real and not characters in two books Housel had read that summer. From the Auburn Football Illustrated for the October 31st, 1987 Auburn, Florida game. Joe Mack and Otto McNabb. There have been some interesting new developments on the recruiting scene concerning the recruitment of Joe Mack and Otto McNabb, developments that are quite troublesome to Auburn. We have been forced to back off recruiting these two fine young men because of alleged NCAA and SEC rules violations. Unfortunately, the alleged rule violations took place right here in this column 3 weeks ago. Those of you who are regulars at Auburn home games will recall that the two young men were mentioned in the space by name, and you were told that they possessed all of the assets we look for in our athletes, from a physical standpoint and from an intangible standpoint. Because their names were mentioned in the column, we had to stop recruiting them. At least two schools in the SEC turned us in for recruiting violations, and we were called on the carpet to answer to the SEC. Because of this unfortunate event, neither of these two young men will ever get the chance to play at Auburn. But there's a catch. Neither will they play for anyone else in the SEC. Otto McNabb and Joe Mack do not exist. They are characters in two best-selling books. Joe Mack is the hero in Louis L'Amour's Last of the Breed, and Otto McNabb is one of a multitude of characters in James Michener's Texas. He is also a hero. Yet two SEC schools turned us in for a recruiting violation because they were mentioned in this column. What we don't know is more amusing than what we do know. We do know that we were turned in, but you can imagine the conversation and consternation that must have gone through recruiting meetings. Who are these guys that Auburn is recruiting? How come they know about them and we don't? Let's get to work on it and find out all we can on this Mack guy and McNabb. Bob Barrett, Associate Commissioner of the SEC, who works with enforcement and compliance with the rules, was justifiably upset when he read the column. When he heard the truth, he laughed. "Wait till I tell these guys this," he said. Bob did not reveal who turned us in, but he did reveal what they said when informed that Otto McNabb and Joe Mack were fictional characters. Unfortunately, what they said is unprintable here because this is, for the most part, still a family publication. Suffice it to say, they laughed too in the end. The note about McNabb and Mack was included to show just how ridiculous recruiting talk can be. Telephones rang off the hook at Auburn, wanting to know who McNabb and Mack were. Their names were mentioned on sports talk shows around the South, and scouting services were checking their files to see who these players were. And Auburn was turned into the SEC and to the NCAA for rules violations. There is a message here, and it should be clear. Recruiting is sometimes a dirty business, and somebody is looking at everything we do, even scanning the pages of this program, eager to catch us in the smallest mistake, the slightest miscue. There's a game going on out there, and it's as serious to its participants as the KGB versus the CIA. See, I told you. These players are playing for keeps. They aren't picking on us. We play the game too. And you, alumni and friends of Auburn, don't need to get caught up in it. It's more than you can handle. It's more than you can comprehend and more than you can understand. The SEC and NCAA have clear-cut rules about the involvement of alumni and friends in the recruiting process. You are not to be involved. You are to stay out of it and leave the recruiting to the coaches. Let this story of Joe Mack and Otto McNabb be a lesson to each of us. If we were turned in for a mention in a column of a football program, think how much closer the recruitment of a real student-athlete is being watched. The slightest mistake on your part, no matter how innocent, could cost us the opportunity to recruit a student-athlete who wants to come to Auburn. Before you do anything at all, call Coach Dye's office and check it out. Remember, Big Brother, or someone, is watching you. Otto was one of the first Texas Rangers. Joe was an American Indian who became a test pilot and was forced down by the Russians. Housel told a writer when the NCAA news came calling, I used them in a notes column to show how ridiculous it is to be worrying about recruiting in September. The next week, the phone kept ringing, asking about those 2 recruits. I guess I made the point. If they're looking that close at fictitious names, think how much closer they're looking at real people. This is a deadly serious game, like the KGB versus the CIA. Fans and boosters need to stay out of it because it's impossible to know the rules. So which fictitious heroes was Housel scouting next? I think we're going after Jack Ryan from Patriot Games, he told the NCAA News. He's a red-blooded American patriot. He'd make a good Auburn man. We're going to pass on Tip O'Neill, though. Let him go to Alabama. They've got a law school.